for this particular reason that art is the reflection of the time in which it has been created, is that anthropology and art, they are so very close. There are two different lines that they cross very frequently. And there is another thing to add about our times, is that, for example, what it says, Sir Martin Rees, that this is the first time in the history of the planet that where humans have the future of the planet in their hands. And that's also something that we need to consider about our times. We had destruction everywhere, and we had pollution, and we had a lot of situations that we need to address, not to mention wars and violence everywhere. So art has always been a political tool. And it has to be, because we humans, we are political animals. So through centuries, art has been used as a political tool. And in contemporary art, I would say that maybe it created a bigger difference, because we had in one hand the Nazis and Stalinists and communists using figurative art, and the answer of the other hemisphere was more modernism and pop art, for example, that it had a better space in the institutions, museums and galleries of this hemisphere, because it was like the reaction to all the figurativism that was happening. As a matter of fact, Nazis didn't like modern art. We know that, no? So it was taking, for example, pop art was a perfect example, because it was, the icons of the time, the mass production, the wonders of capitalism. So, but the thing is, the point is that art needs to be political somehow, because it's created by humans, and humans are political animals. And then another thing that is important in my work is the language. And Jacques Derrida, the philosopher, the French philosopher, he said that the language is exactly, I want to say exactly what he says. The language has its own meaning. Forget about words, forget about the way you say it. Language per se has its own meaning. And that's something that I try to do in my work. And the way I assume this is that the language that I use has to have a connection with the subject. So that's why sometimes I use videos, sometimes I use paintings, and sometimes I use sculpture, photography, because that's the language, and the language, in my opinion, has to have a connection with the subject that I'm working with, as well as other things. People consider me like a conceptual artist. I think that conceptual artists is everyone, because without a strong concept, I think that there cannot be really art. And as I was telling before, the fact that art has to be political, it means that art needs to have a concept behind it. So, talking about the language that I use, sometimes I use exactly painting, for example. These are all words, okay? And I started becoming in love with fiber. And I started working with natural fibers. And I started creating these landscapes, sorry. These landscapes with materials collected in the area, trying to portray the kind of light and the materials and my experience in in those spaces, in those places. So I was working with several things, even stones, feathers, and several different materials that collected in that area. That was the language that I was using. I was very much into the fibers at that point. And I think that I was, in a way, in love with fibers because of my time in Egypt, that I was making a course of papyrus, how to elaborate papyrus. And that's the way I became. And I saw in the fibers the possibility of portraying the landscape with those fibers, and also, most important maybe, was to create this unity between the support and the artwork. So instead of using a support paper or a canvas or something, I wanted to use the same materials that I collected. So the support of the artwork was totally united, and it was the same artwork, not separated. So these are some of the examples of this time, and where I was trying to make these landscapes with fibers and with materials and pigments collected in the place that I was trying to portray. And these are some works that are kind of the same thing in concept. These were from the Metallic Seas, the body of works that I did many, many years ago. And here I came a little more synthetic, because I was using only reflection of light and matter. In this case, the matter was fiber of algae, and the reflection of light was the light over the sea. During the night, it's like silver, and during the day, it's like gold. So I was using gold and silver, foil, and copper, depending on different days. There was a little bit of conceptual things in there, like the message in the bottle and those things, no? But I also, in a poetic way, was using water from the sea, but it didn't make any difference at the end. It was just a poetical gesture that I was doing. Here I am collecting fibers. These are some more words. And in my research, I wanted to go a little farther with the material. And so I started thinking in morphogenesis. Alan Turing, in the 50s, he wrote the book about morphogenesis. And morphogenesis talks about why some cells, they know that they need to be the black stripe of the zebra, and other ones, they need to be the white stripe. So all these patterns that in nature, you can see in shells and everywhere, how these cells, when they are forming, they know it's about chemistry and it's about morphogenesis, how they're going to react, because they react in a natural way. And they also do have the Wentworth formulations about growth and form, where it says that a little intervention can alter those kind of sequences. So a little intervention, for example, here you can see the fish can react to make the fish fatter or thinner or something. So working in those concepts, I started working something that was much more morphogenical. And this was some works with crude oil, and they were just crude oil, following this idea that I have of portraying the subject with the subject. So the idea of these works, they were crude oil with ethanol, and sometimes I use a little bit of pigments. And they were different layers, treated in different layers, translucent because it was over vinyl. That the vinyl is a byproduct of petroleum, right? So there was this conversation about the original matter versus the elaborated matter, in this case, the vinyl, and how complex that process was, because for us it's, given for granted that there is buying, but there is a very complex process and several years, and there are a lot of things involved in there. Also economics, also our dependence in crude oil, all those things. So one of the things that I like to do is to synthesize the information. Try to go to the first original thing. That's why I just was using just crude oil to portray crude oil. Because synthesis promotes universality. So multiple lectures of the artwork. There is nothing given in there. There is no orientation to the spectator. There is just this. So you can have multiple readings according to but one of the things that I wanted was very, very shiny surfaces. They were almost like mirrors. I don't know if you can see that the letters in the wall, they are reflecting in the letters in the wall, they are reflecting over the paintings, almost like a mirror, because I wanted the spectator to see itself reflected in this world of crude oil. And my intervention at that point was almost nothing. I was letting the material to react in the way it wanted to react to the ethanol and to the pigments and how it dissolved in the vinyl. And they were almost like alive because the different layers give some three-dimensionality and also depth and a kind of a kinetic effect when you walk over them. So again, going to the search of synthesis, it also defines a narrative and opens a conversation. So you are in here, you are looking, well, let's start having a conversation. And every time that I show these works, everywhere that I show them, there was always panels of discussions about the subject with different people of different fields, experts in different fields, from health and economics, and talking about the good aspects and the bad aspects. So this is just me working in that process. But again, my intervention was minimal, and that's what I wanted at that point. Then, again, talking about using the subject. This is a piece called The Presence of Emptiness. And how can I portray emptiness? How can I portray that feeling? So emptiness is always defined by something. You say an empty drawer, an empty car, an empty house. It's always defined by something. So I came up, okay, I'm going to make this an empty box. And that's the point. That's the presence of emptiness. And this is the book, The Presence of Emptiness. It was a book with an empty space, going through it. Again, trying to use the main material that was, in this case, emptiness. These were other works. They were about oak trees, but really they were about derooting an oak tree or derooting a tree. That was called the Wandering Skin Project, and it started with a photography study of the oak trees, and then a big interview to 7 different women about several questions that they didn't know the way I was relating them to being derooted, to being taken from a place and transported to another one, and maybe derooted totally. So I was working, in this case, it was all wood, vegetable pigments, bark of the trees, with, you can see more or less the scale, and again, trying to work with these materials. Now, I don't know if you noticed that there is always a repetition. And when you see the works of Collet, they are almost the same, repeated. They are different, but they are the same. And this is a concept that Gilles Deleuze handles very well, and I choose this image precisely because what it says. It says that there is always repetition everywhere, but every repetition is going to be different than the original. So, for example, no two grains of sand are going to be never the same. For example, an oak leaf, you say oak leaves, yes, but each one is different than the previous one. There is some kind of difference in them. So I use a lot of repetition because it's also a marketing tool, like to repeat the same story 1,000 times to people so they get it. Yeah? So yeah. And I think that you notice that already in the images that I showed you. There is a lot of repetition over seconds. And now I'm going to talk a little bit because I think that we need to talk about this so you can understand. Because one of the beautiful things of making an exhibition is that there is a juxtaposition of all the works because they are all related at the end. So if you take only one and you take it out of the context, even if you enter the gallery and you think that they are not related, really, they are totally related. And that's the beauty of making an exhibition because the sum of all, they make a different total that the parts, right? A different, you can see the narrative in a better way. And I'm going to stop a second to say that I think I forgot to touch the point of the matter. The matter for me is very important, as you saw previously with wood or oak trees or the collective materials. The matter is very important, and because other than color is the first thing that the spectator perceives. And when you perceive matter, you are going to your own archive of experiences. When you see the gauze, for example, you know that that's soft. When you see stone, you know that wood, cold and hard. So you don't need to touch the material most of the times because you have your own memory of, in your archive, of experiences with the material, but also it takes you to your own memory archive of experiences. So, for example, if you see a ball, you connect that ball with electricity or with lights, or with, if you see gauze, you connect the gauze with wounds, healing wounds. So for me, also, that's why the material acquires much more importance in the artwork. So, talking about this image in 1520 something, the King of Spain, Charles V, he gave the province of Venezuela, you should know this, to the Western. There were some bankers from Germany. He owed a lot of money to these bankers, and he, the way for him to pay them was giving them the province of Venezuela for extract and colonize, and for a period of 40 years or something like that. So this is important because this was the first experience of neocolonialism in history that I know about. And what is the difference between colonialists and neocolonialists is that colonialists are countries that colonize other countries, but neocolonialists are companies that colonize countries. So this was a private bank, and that would be the definition of neocolonialism in the 1520 something. And the other important thing is that it's the only German colony in the Americas, because there was a lot of migration, right? That colony, this was the only colony in the Americas of Germans. So I'm talking about this because okay, let's go to, well, in 2017 I was invited to make an exhibition, and it was in the frame of a festival called Internationale, where 3,000 something journalists, they come together in the town of Ferrara. And since I was going to have exhibition at the same time of this festival, and it was in front of the main place of reunion of the Internationale, so I wanted to create this piece that is about national identity. And one of the things that national identity reflects more than national identity is the flag. When we see the flag, when we are, I don't know, in Germany, and we are walking in the street and we see a little Mexican flag in the window of a restaurant, it touches us, right? Always the presence of our flag somehow touches us. And it's one of the symbols of national identity. So talking about national identity, I just took the Venezuelan flag and I juxtaposed that flag with several other flags that are neocolonizing the country. So I started here, I don't know if you can see, I started with the Vatican because that was maybe the first thing, and then I continue with several flags. But this is another example that I'm trying to touch a subject with a subject. National identity with the flag, and then transforming those flags, and erasing or taking down the stars of the flag, and they are ready to be transported to be exported. And I am talking about this so you can understand a little better what is happening in the gallery, because I'm talking here, I'm trying to talk about colonialism and neocolonialism and the scars that can leave, that they last centuries. So David Harvey, he says that colonization is expropriation. Let me look for it for you. I'm sorry. Accumulation by dispossession. And this is very interesting. Andrade is a Brazilian poet, and in the 20s he wrote with a group of friends this manifesto, Anthropófago, about the situation of post-colonial people. What is left after the colony? And one of the phrases that became really famous of this manifesto was the tupi or la tupi. And it was written like this in the manifesto. So it's not tupi or tupi, but yet we need to understand that tupi or la tupi is a group of indigenous people from Brazil, a tribe, and they are called tupi. So he was playing with the tupi or tupi, you know, the transculturalization. Should we tupi or not tupi? Should we go to this side or should we go to the other side? Should we remain tupi? Should we go to? So, and this was the phrase that was very made famous, as a matter of fact, the manifesto. And he explained that manifesto, he said the anthropophagist manifesto, because he said that autochthonous people from Brazil, they were devouring the foreign culture in order to feel that they belong, instead of being in reverse. So, and that's the point of the graphs in here. The graphs, or los injertos, this is just a gesture occurred during some walks, but that's the point. Where is my culture, or is a mix of cultures, or is a mix of this and that, or where is cultural appreciation and where is cultural appropriation. So this colonization is also not only harmful for the individuals of the country, but it's also very harmful for the environment. So you saw, I think that you all saw the video about drugs and how global warming alters everything and then other things like, for example, the bad boys, that these are treated in a very cynical way, but you know, the coal is the worst polluted element of pollution to the air. And all that colonization, the feeling of not being enough, the destruction of the natural environment in order to subtract goods from them. All that promotes immigration. And the crisis of the global warming is going to promote much more immigration. So, and this is the point of the masses. This is the point of the heraldos, harbingers in English. And these were, I was inspired by the primitive masks. It's one of the first primitive expressions of art used for different situations or ceremonies. But at this point, I was invited to have a show in Venice, the Venice Biennale, and you all know the relationship between Venice and the carnival and the masks and all that. And also, I was looking at the TV, I was looking at the news, and at the point was the situation with Syria, that they were attacking Syrian people with bio weapons. And at the same time, there was all this commotion in Venezuela happening when the students were using the gas masks to protect themselves during the manifestations. And also, I was invited to have an exhibition at the Archaeological Museum. So I was wondering, well, this is what we're going to leave as a legacy of our times. This is what we're, you know, the violence and the pollution, and as you can see, they are treated in a very primitive way. And these empty bodies, alienated, with no soul, no memories, no nothing. That's why kind of the bodies are kind of empty, without identity. So that was the context in which I created these masks. And again, we had the repetition, and we had the interest in the matter, and the synthesis of everything that is happening just in this small group. Then talking a little bit about the boucherie, again, the importance of the material. One of the things that I really like of this piece, I think that she doesn't need much explanation because it's a very literal piece. Again, here we have the repetition. And one of the things that I like is how she stands in the space and she occupies the space with the shadows it produces. It was kind of very subtle in the gallery because we have a lot of lights coming in, natural light, but darker it becomes, you can feel the, as a matter of fact, Well, my inspiration for this piece was a butcher shop and a temple. It's like going through those lines of those red textiles would be like entering in a temple and asking, please, 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 something. No, let's meditate, let's think about it, let's improve the situation that is happening. And here, I chose the three big things because it's not only violence against each other, it's also violence against nature, and it's also psychological violence. So I think that this piece doesn't need that much explanation or talking about because it's very literal. And again, in talking about the repetition, each one of them is completely different to the other. And maybe the only thing that I would like to say, just like a fact, is that the United States represents only the 4% of the Earth population. It's nothing, the 4% is nothing. And the 50% of the guns are in the US, so that is like 1.3 guns for each individual. And it looks like there are no grocery stores. No? And you need to kill your rabbit and kill your deer in order to and in a way it's true in some places, but in other places that's not true. And is this hunter thing, hunting? There is another number that 80% of the animals that are sold in Africa for hunting, they sold an elephant or they sold, a lion or whatever. 80% they are sold to American citizens. So it's a neurosis of being hunting. So how do we live in this world of violence and destruction of the planet and Earth and the mass? Well, there is the answer in Festinger. Festinger with the theory of the cognitive dissonances. So the cognitive dissonance is that level that we create, that we say, and it comes very much from our times of the echo chamber and the elastic truth, and so the cognitive dissonance allows you to create your own reality. But that reality cannot be stand in front of the truth because it falls apart. So it's very fragile. It's, for example, when you are supposed to quit smoking. You say, no, I'm not quitting smoking because if I quit smoking, I'm going to gain weight, and that's worse. So that would be an example of a cognitive dissonance. So these are my interpretations of the cognitive dissonance. That is what allows us to sometimes to go forward and to live in the situation that we are. And but that's also bad because it creates, again, these echo chambers, and this creates these situations where you are reinforcing untruthful things. So I decided to put them over very rough material, that is beams from a Wisconsin barn, because it is a kind of a rough reality, and they are strong, and they are present, and then these very fragile things that that cannot stand being confronted with the truth. So there are you can trick your eye. You can think that, okay, this may go together, but when you approach and you see them closer, you realize that they cannot go together. So when you confront them with the reality, they just disappear because they cannot do it. Now, about maybe the last pieces. I don't know how there are several things that I went over them, but never mind. So the last works are both together. It was a project during the pandemic called Head in the Clouds and Feet in the Ground. So Head in the Clouds and Feet on the Ground, during the pandemic, diverse things happened. But one of the things that were, for me, more important were two things. The lack of social interaction. I was having this need of having some kind of social interaction. And it came the idea of asking two different people from different parts of the world to connect with me in a particular time, a particular day, and then I received this material. But really, what is important in here, for me, is the Morse code. What the piece is really about is the Morse code. Because we are living in a period of time with a lot of new codes. The code of behavior with each other. Keep the distance, wear the mask, don't touch, The new code of how to behave in a Zoom meeting, how this is going to work. Put the pause, not put the pause, put the microphone, everything. The code of the virus. They were trying to decode to create the vaccine. So for me, the important thing is the code. This piece is about codes. And I use an old code in a nostalgic way, maybe, of the old times of whatever. But what is really important for me here, in both of them, is the code. This one is more a social, collaborative work, I would say. And I think that the idea came from these rosetones of the churches, it's again like a prayer, because I was very optimistic. I thought that really, after the pandemic, the world was going to change and people were going to be more aware of their environment and whatever. And it happens that apparently nothing happened. Apparently we are, again, in colonial times and the world is terrible. But the other part of this work was this one, Feet on the Ground, Los Pies en la Tierra. And this was more about me, myself, not the collaborative, but it was about me. And I chose these corn seeds because I come from the culture of corn, but also because corn is a very resilient plant. Corn, nowadays, it's grown everywhere in the planet, and it's very adaptable. And the idea of these two pieces were that, yes, we all have the same sky over us, but it depends the way you see the sky, or the angle, or whatever, where you have your feet on the ground. Now with your feet on the ground, then this kind of energy encapsulated, like I would like to take with me and plants in other places, is what gives you your identity and your culture, because the vegetation is everything, it's the colors, it's the weather, it's the fibers that you're used to, the cooking that you're used to. So this one was much more personal to me than the other one. And just to finish, I don't know if you notice, I hope that I didn't make you notice how all the pieces are connected with each other. Because in here, we can also talk about what's happening here? We can also talk about this neo-colonialism of the skies, okay? The tourists in the sky, and now we're going to do this in Mars, and then we're going to be here. And so everything in one way or the other is, all the words are connected. And they acquired, and they are together. That doesn't mean that this has been my production in the last 4 years, but are the more, maybe the more important pieces that they connect and they give you a narrative of my research as an artist and which tools I use when we talk about morphogenesis, when we talk about repetition, when we talk about synthesis. What are the tools that I work with to create my works? And last, well, I'm going to leave it like this. More, and that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know.
I want to congratulate you for this presentation because you allowed me to have a deeper understanding of your work. I really like that you presented the paths that you have developed, and I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you very much.
And do you have any particular question about any of the pieces or not?
Hey Mary, I do have a question. When you were talking about how you really got the love for not textile but material, and how do you go from love to love? How do you don't lose that being in love with something and falling in love with something else? How do you keep that
Yes.
emotion, inspiration going?
Yes. For example, when I was working with the Collet, that was a technique that took me 14 years to develop. Because it's not easy working with Collet. How to stabilize it and how to, this, believe me, super complex. Super complex. But I was starting to be labeled. You know? Oh yes, the one with the Collet. That is one part. And the other part is that in me personally, I need to give answers to the moment. That's why, also, there are a lot of people that consider me like as a matter of fact, I think that is true. I am a very arte povera kind of artist. Arte povera, that I use like very simple materials and very inexpensive materials and very those kind of things. And I think yes, but I cannot remain in one place because the world doesn't stay in one place. So it changes every day, every second, and as I was saying, I think that the art needs to be the reflection of the moment in which I have been created, in concept and in materials and everything. And maybe that was one of the things that moved me to work with video. You've seen only one video, but when I started working with video, it was like just like a conceptual reinforcement for the exhibition. But now it's more like really video art. And because it's a tool that is in there and that allows you to work, for example, with water without the need of having a special camera in front of the gallery. You just video the process and you show it to the spectator.
Well, I have one more. If you were sitting right here, and there was Mary looking at Mary, and you would be like, what surprises Mary about Mary?
The adaptability.
Thank you.
I think that I am very adaptable to a lot of things.
Thank you.
And I can work everywhere, you know. It has happened sometimes that I have been in the need of working in hotel rooms. But I was having an exhibition in Paris many years ago, based on mechanic seas, and when I arrived to the gallery, oh my God, there are not enough artworks in here for this gallery. So in the last 3 days, we were installing, they were installing, and I was working in the hotel room. So I am very adaptable in that sense. I'm curious about materials. I'm curious about what if.
Thank you.
No, thanks to you for the question.
Did I understand you correctly in saying that this was based on the image that you have here, is based on the Morse code?
Yes,
And so does this say something in Morse code?
yes,
I missed-
yes. Here it says, simultaneous celestial contemplation, April 8, 2022. Because the message is the code. I don't need to tell you any other message, because the piece is about codes. So this is all about. Then they are random, the little skies, they are random. I didn't want to put them in any kind of organized, by time. All the nights a year, all the days. I just made my own composition. But that's the artist talking. But the essence of the artwork is really the Morse code. It's not even the skies. The skies invites you to contemplation. The music that Sulpi created for the piece invites you to a contemplation. You take your time, and go slowly, and see each one of the skies, because they are beautiful per se. But the real subject of the piece is codes.
Okay, thank you.
Mery, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. So I have a question, because I think the pandemic affected us differently, and how did you stay inspired to continue to create art when things were so dark, and you really didn't have your everyday contact that you did with the outside world?
Well, precisely because of that. I was, in those days, I was looking at the sky a lot, because I was just, hanging around in the park with no people or whatever, or just in a chair in my backyard. And we are social. We need the social interaction. If you think about having a walk in the park alone, it's completely different than having a walk in the park with some friends. And I think that most of the things that we do are social things, because you comment with other person or whatever. Oh, look, the water is so beautiful today. Oh, look, it's going to rain or whatever. Oh, I went to the park and it was raining. And we were missing that social part, because everything, going to an opening, everything is a social act. So, lacking of that social act came to my mind, that I wanted to interact with several people around the world. And it was not, in this case, was not the amount of people, but covering area. Because one of the things that I was thinking is, okay, this is the sky that I'm looking at, we are looking at everywhere. And with this pandemic, that shows that we are in the same world. We all have the same sky over us. Never mind your religion or your color or your whatever. So I felt the need of having this social interaction, and it was very joyful to receive all those little images, one after the other, because it was everybody at the same time. So it was like beep, 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 the phone sounding. It was very stimulating, and it was very nice after all that time, meditating and alone and thinking about it. But I already had the idea of the code.
Thank you.
Fascinating by your art, and now by your presentation and explanation. In fact, for somebody who tends to view contemporary art sometimes a little like, what does it mean? What is? I have to say that your approach to conceptualism is brilliant. I just love it. It's incredibly well done. And I'm struck by the fact that you refer to French philosophers like Derrida much more than the list, whom you also quote, whose main idea is subjectivism, and whose main approach to trying to define what is the meaning when everything is subjective is using the technique that he calls deconstruction.
Exactly.
So, which in a way is like peeling the layers of an onion.
Exactly.
And by the time you're finished peeling layers, you're left with nothing.
Exactly.
But you do something that I think is very, very smart. And that's the description that you have next to each piece, which in a way takes away some of the subjectivism because you impose an interpretive paradigm based on your explanation of what it is.
Yes. But that deconstruction that you were talking about, that's exactly what I use to go to the synthesis. I start constructing every material, every thought, every information that I receive about the subject. And that is when you put together, you just put together some of the pieces to create a synthesis, cleaning out the onion. And about the explanations, normally I didn't used to do that. I didn't like that because I thought I want people to just feel what they want to feel. But then I understood several people from galleries and museums are saying to me, no, you need to put information because not everybody is going to understand, not even the habit. And I continue to think that it's maybe pushing a little bit the people to have their own, instead of having their own perception of their work, I'm pushing them to what was my idea. But I think that you are right, and it's important because people understand a little more.
And because it is, and it's to me really interesting that another author, another theory that you make reference to is Leon Festinger and the theory of cognitive dissonance. And I can see a case like, for example, with the Morse code, that somebody, before reading your explanation, approaches it and says, oh, nice pictures of the sky, beautiful clouds. And then the person reads the explanation and says, oops, that's not what it is about. How do you then deal with the act of cognitive dissonance that the person will experience between what their eyes tell them and then the interpretive paradigm that you have imposed on the work?
Well, I think that the spectator needs to deal with that, not me. They need to deal but, oh, this is not about only the sky, there is something else in here. Oh, now I get it. Why they are separated and why there are 2 dots and 3 lines. So, that, it's like, for example, in the heraldos, the masks, no? There is a lot of things behind that because we were talking about colonialism and all that. And there is Fanon, you know Fanon?
Yes, yeah, Franz Fanon.
In the book, I think it was Black Skin, White Mask. There was the book, the title of the book, where he expresses the need of wearing this mask to approach the culture of the colonizer in order for the sake of being recognized. And that's so true, no? He also talks about the need of speaking the language, for example, the use of a Creole. You're going to be seen like a marginalized person, but if you speak the language perfectly, you are second. But in that process, you lose a lot of what is your own culture, and you create kind of a new culture, mix match with the one of the colonizer. Because this is so complex, because at the end, what happens is you eradicate totally them. And he refers a lot to Africa, because in Americas, they really eradicated the the autochthonous people, the original people. But in Africa, no, in Africa, there are still the African people with them. But the cultures has been very harmed. And you have all this conversation that is currently happening about repatriating a lot of artworks to their original countries in Africa. And I found out several weeks ago, one of the artists that I like the best is Collet, and he was talking about the enormous piles, gigantescous piles of artworks that they were burned by the Jesuits because the orientation was to eradicate the culture and convert them to Christianity, but was converting them to our culture. And so the masks, they have a lot to do with that. And I put those antibodies, it's like empty of identity. And wearing the mask like found in the title of his book, no? Yes, there are a lot of things because, again, anthropology, for example, and art, they are very much together. Science and art, they are very much together. And philosophy and art, they are very much together.